All right, welcome back, everybody, to the show. My name is Aaron, and this is my lovely wife, Asia. Today,
Hello.
we have a brand new guest with us today. His name is JC Chamberlain. So, JC, a few things I guess the audience should know before we get going. You are quite an accomplished person in many different ways. That stems from sports, back for rowing and cycling and winning national championships. You got a degree from Princeton, so academically, you've had some success in business. You've managed $1 billion real estate portfolio. You've started startups. You've sold startups. You're currently running a business, as far as I understand, and you also have run a non-for-profit. So, quite an array of things. You're a parent. So, the first question that I have for you, first of all, welcome. We're
Thank
very
you.
excited to chat with you today.
Mhm.
The first question I have for you is I mean, obviously, it's just explained, you've done numerous things across an array of different fields. In it seems like you're a very motivated and driven person to accomplish that many things in such an array of fields, right? Where do you think that comes from for you? Where do you think that starts?
Oh gosh. I don't think I have any particular talent, but I keep moving, right? And I think that's part and parcel to a good life is to keep looking out around you and see what's working. I believe that success leaves clues, and so all of us are going to have a dip at some point, somewhere. Whether it's going to be in a relationship or a business or uh, something that relates to your health. And so if you're constantly looking around you for things that appear to be working, um, you have something to go to when you run into one of those setbacks.
So is this something you think you picked up on early in life, or is it something maybe later in life that somebody had to explain to you and you figured it out then, or was one of your parents super motivated?
Yeah, good question. I had rheumatic fever when I was 4, and um, one of my heart valves didn't heal right. And so, the doctors told this little 4-year-old boy that he was never going to be able to do sports.
Mm.
And, my reaction to that was, let's find something I can do.
Yeah.
And I think that I've been doing that ever since. I have what I would call a persistent ability to reframe setbacks into opportunities. And I think that's become a skill that a lot of people have looked at and they say, "Boy, I wish I could do that." I wish there
Definitely.
was a way to figure this out so that because we're all going to have a setback of some sort. And I always looked at life that way. But I think the influence came from my mom. I will say she was fond of saying to us in times that called for encouragement, "Don't worry, nothing is going to be okay."
Interesting.
And this was her worldview. And it took a while for that to really sink into me that life is not going to go your way.
Right.
But that doesn't have to that doesn't mean that you're going to have a bad life. In fact, I think the reason that I've had a very good life, way above average, in my opinion, and other people look at my life and they say, you've been blessed by all of these opportunities. And I think it's because she helped us present to life that in an over prepared way. So she always kind of demanded of us. She was a mom who we were never quite good enough. We could have done better, uh, but she was also incredibly supportive. And so I would say definitely came from her. Uh, it changed my worldview that life is not going to go your way, but if you show up with an above average vocabulary and a real sincere interest in the things around you, that you're going to eventually wind up with the microphone at the head of the room.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so somebody's going to say, what's your opinion about this?
Mhm.
And then that has made all the difference for me.
That's a really interesting quote. I've never heard anyone say it like that
Me either.
before. You obviously hear a million people say, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay." But it's not kind of an odd structure because in essence you're setting people up for when it's not okay. It's like totally, shatters what they thought was going to happen as if everything is going to be okay. And what your mom was saying, don't worry, everything's not going to be okay. It almost, not that you're trying to be very negative, but it seems like you're more prepared. Oh, she told me everything's not going to be okay, and now I can deal with that when it comes. It's a bit more expected rather than I find the other way is like hard to deal with when you're like, well, I can't believe this has happened to me. This is so terrible. Now I have no skills to deal with it because I never even saw anything bad happening to me. It feels like that would be a lot harder to deal with. So I think that's really interesting the way your mom framed that and sort of put that into you and your siblings if you had siblings. But
Yeah, she would even like when early on we got into bicycle riding and bicycle racing and training, and uh, we would frequently crash while we were training, practicing cornering or just
Mm.
get mixed up with another bike too close, and she would run to the bike, and her first question was, "Is the bike okay?" And she figured she could patch us up later if the bike
yeah,
was okay, we could finish the race.
right.
And that became my frame of reference for bicycle racing. Was crashing is part of racing, and you're going to get up, and if your bike is okay, you can finish. And I think that plays out in your life. You're going to have different elements where if fundamentally that same thing comes into play.
Yeah.
So her perspective was, most things in life can be fixed, except your attitude. And if you begin with the right attitude about outcomes, then you're gonna flow through to the right outcome, the best possible outcome for you. And so that's something that I experienced many, many times during my life. Yeah.
So is that kind of where you got your start for yourself in terms of your kind of competitive nature and kind of like leading you into all of these other ventures? Was that through like the competitive bicycle racing? Is that where you started?
Yeah, I think some of it was on board early. When you tell a 6-year-old he can't play sports, I turned my attention to the violin, and I always loved sitting at the record player and trying to sing with the Vienna Boys Choir, because up until a certain point in my life, I had a soprano voice, and I still have a pretty good voice, even it's become a lot of octaves lower now. Um, but until I heard the symphony, I didn't know that I wanted to play the violin. And then at age 7, I dragged my parents to the stringed instrument, demonstration at the high school, and I asked them to buy me a violin because obviously I wasn't going to be doing sports. So what else could I do that was in good alignment with something that I loved, which was music? And my dad was really into hi-fi. I mean, he loved. We built hi-fi cabinets together. We had a reel-to-reel recording and tape deck. I learned about um, sort of high fidelity technology early on because of him, and I started playing the violin 3 hours a day. And I would kneel in front of the record player and play every note that I could get. And it was like the Suzuki method, where they don't use music. It's just a kind of a mental entrainment on the melody.
Mhm.
And I learned that if you keep moving the bow and you keep moving your fingers, eventually you're going to hit some correct notes. And I could hear music better than I could read music.
Mhm.
Even today, I struggle reading sheet music if I'm singing. But if I'm positioned next to someone who knows this, who can read the sheet music, I can hear the tune. And so I think we have to find the skills that we have and use them. And in my case, it started out by throwing myself into this 3 hours a day. I didn't really realize that was a competitive element, but it was me versus me. I wanted to be the very best at the violin. And I really wanted to play like they did on the record player.
Yeah.
And I didn't know any better. And when my voice broke, I knew I wasn't going to Vienna to sing in the boys' choir. And so around age 10, I had now played the violin a lot. And my grandmother sent me a $20 bill, which was a lot of money for a 10-year-old. And I snuck out to a sporting goods store and I bought a catcher's mitt and 3 baseballs, even though I was not allowed to play sports. And I wanted to be the catcher. And so I figured out how far it was from home base to second base. And I stepped off that distance. I actually had to step out into the street a little bit in my neighborhood, and I would throw the baseballs against the bottom step on my front porch. We had concrete steps and a wooden door, so I didn't break any windows. And it turned out to be a perfect place for me to learn how to throw a runner out at second base. And I threw those 3 baseballs against the concrete steps so many times that the leather skin came off the baseballs. And I think that was the beginning of me really experiencing this competitive spirit of me versus me, that I wanted to get better at something. I wanted to be so good that they couldn't say I couldn't do that sport. And finally, my mom relented and she said, you can play baseball, but only catcher. As I had demonstrated that maybe I had some skill there. And she said, but I'm not going to be home in time for you to go to the baseball diamond. And my dad had left our home at that point, so he was not in the picture. So she bought me a 1-speed bicycle. And I rode that bicycle to the baseball diamond with my glove. And I learned to be the best darn catcher that I could be. And serendipitously, I was riding my bike. And I first experienced this incredible freedom of being on 2 wheels that I've been enjoying ever since. Now
Well,
I've ridden over 440,000 miles since
yeah,
1970.
I was reading that you've spent some time on a bike. So
Yeah.
I have 2 questions for you, but this isn't. I feel like I've picked up on this as I've gotten a little bit older, and you mentioned a few times, like even at a younger age, like that you felt like it was you trying to get better than the other version of you, and oftentimes, especially in sports, like I played competitive golf and a number of other sports, but primarily golf, and oftentimes it's really hard to get to the point where you're just competing with yourself, where you're trying to just get a little bit better than yourself. And what oftentimes my experience, and this applies to a number of different things, especially business too, competing, and that's competition. It's really difficult to compete, in my opinion, when you're trying to beat other people. You're not just doing your thing and trying to get better than what you were a little bit better than what you were yesterday. What do you think about that? How do you think about that? Did did coming did it come naturally to you just to be like, you know what, my goal here is just to be better than I was yesterday. It's not relevant what other people are doing. Sure, we're competing in a race or we're competing in a game, but really what I'm doing is just trying to do the best thing that I can and be a little bit better. Is that something that just comes to you, or is it something you thought about?
Uh, they've interviewed all the top professionals in uh, hundreds of sports, and the incredible uh, alignment of the top 5 athletes. Let's just pick the 5 most well-known sports. Um, and they asked those athletes, what kind of talk do you do with yourself? What is your self-talk? when you miss a point, or you have a bad stroke, or in rowing, you have a bad stroke, or in cycling, you have a climb where you just couldn't get into a rhythm. How do you talk to yourself? And there's a famous commencement speech. I think the tennis player's name is Federer.
Roger Federer, yes.
Yeah, Roger Federer is probably the most listened to commencement speech. And he says, I missed 54% of my shots in my pro career. And yet I'm champion. I've been number one many, many, many times, and this is extraordinary. So they said, well, how do you feel when you miss a shot? He says, I tell myself that I'm in the best sport in the world and that this is the best day and I'm in the best shape of my life. And I think I engaged in that kind of self-talk naturally. I didn't have the kind of analysis that I have now looking back on my life.
Sure.
I was fortunate to struggle through some very early setbacks where, my dad wasn't around. And so the 10 kids who had dads that coached other teams, they all made the travel team in baseball. And I didn't have that resource, even though I was clearly the number one catcher and I could outfield or outbat those other kids, but I didn't get chosen for the team. And, that was a lonely bike ride home that day. And I vowed that I would excel in a way that they could not ignore. And well, I did eventually make the travel team. And I think it's just because I was so persistent. And mom was supportive enough. She didn't push me down. I think when I had setbacks, she said, how can you do better? And this was her mantra. She always pushed us to do better, ask more of ourselves. She insisted that we know 7,000 words by the time we were 7 years old. She believed that having a better vocabulary was going to be the key to having a better life. And so that spilled over into, excelling in a lot of other areas, academic and athletic areas. So I think it was within me. I was actually very much of a collaborator. And I'm going to make one quick reference to bicycle racing, where I viewed me and the other kids who were in these races when I was, 14, 15 years old. I thought that we were all just a bundle of energy, and that is kind of it's an idea that we accept more now than we did when I was 15. That each one of us is a thread, right? And what we're all connected. And my mother would say to me, remember, we're all in this alone.
Yeah. That's another good
And one more thing from my mom, you think, wow, he had a pretty bad childhood. But what she really meant, now that I have all this perspective to look back on, is that we're each responsible alone for our little filament of life, to be the best version of us that we can be. But we are part of this incredible fabric. We're all connected. And the fabric of humankind is extraordinary. Uh, she used to say, we're all cut out of the same cloth, but it's by no means ordinary cloth.
Yeah. No, it's not.
And so she wanted us to be above average, and so she pushed us in that way, but she wanted us to know that we were connected. And I think that's an element of collaboration, along with being fiercely demanding of myself to be the best version that I could be of myself. And in a way, it was my way of coping with a world that wasn't going to go my way, and a family situation that wasn't exactly ideal. And I think I naturally reframed that into creating whatever advantage I could for myself.
You've been in world of sports and world of business, and do you think that has sort of gone by the wayside, like having a high standard for yourself and whatever, I mean, an easy one today is just kids. I mean, it's really easy just to see what happens at the school level or participation trophies for everybody. Like it feels to me, and I haven't been around as long as you have, but it feels to me like it's okay not to demand very much of yourself anymore. It's okay to like be decent at stuff, and as long as you gave, what you think is your best effort, everything's fine and everyone deserves it. Like, do you think that idea has sort of gone by the wayside in society a little bit?
Well, um, I think, when you lack extrinsic rewards, right, you turn to the intrinsic side. And so, uh, if you are only looking for A grades or A minus or, B plus and above, those are extrinsic by nature.
Sure.
Later on that translates into salary awards or bonuses or things that relate to performance. Uh, my parents used to just put the grades on the refrigerator. They didn't make any comments about them.
Everyone can see it.
Yeah. And that was, for me, that was an intrinsic reward. But my brother was the better student. He always got higher grades than I did. And um, for some reason, I had to learn that my experience of the world was different than his. And, seeing those grades up there, I could have developed a terrible inferiority complex because he always got the higher grades. But he was very good at book learning. And it turned out that I was very good at other ways of learning. And I grew comfortable with things that he could not get comfortable with. I had an ability to connect with people, for example, and he was more a loner. He was more bookish, and I was more experiential. And my mom was able to celebrate both of us for our skills. And so I think we grew up in an environment where, her response for all of her shortcomings, pushing us so hard, she would always ask us, "How do you feel?" And that gave us the opportunity to check inside.
Right.
How did I feel about this victory or about this or about that? And how I felt was more important than how I did.
Yeah.
She wouldn't ask me, did I get first place? She'd say, how do you feel? And then she would connect with that. And I think it made a huge difference in my own parenting, you know, uh, for us to be able to make a generational difference in our children, in our families. Um, at some point there has to be a shift from how we used to do it to how we're going to do it. And my son is now almost 38, and I still get kisses on the lips from him, and I love you, Dad. And the grandchildren are that way with me because I think he's that way with them.
Right.
Mhm.
And
Normal to
my parents were not that way with me. So we accomplished in just one generation or two generations a shift in empathic engagement.
Mhm.
So that's kind of cool to experience that. And I know my mom's dad was a very hard-nosed, General Motors
Yeah.
dealer. And his response to discord in human affairs was to file a lawsuit. And, those kinds of things have a place. But I would rather collaborate to work out differences. And I think I've been successful at doing that in my work career. Whereas he would resort to a lawsuit.
I think that's a good reminder as well with people who do have children and just the differences between one child from the other. And when you go and ask them about how you feel, like you bringing up that like not caring about the result of the first place trophy or this, that, or the other thing, but being like, how do you feel? Are you proud of that? Did you give it all of your effort? Did you work your hardest? Like working on those things that are more internal versus the external validation. I just think that's so important and such a good reminder because every child and person is going to come into this world with their own inherent unique skills and talents and things that they are interested in and they want to put their time and effort into versus, you might have a child who hates school, but is more of that experiential learner and wants to go out and do the things and get their hands dirty and participate in the activities. And I don't think that either one is right or wrong, right? Like I think lean into what that child is most interested in and then build upon that. Because I think then you're going to build the confidence within them. And then they're going to be more willing to try the things that might be more difficult for them or more challenging because they've built that confidence through the things that they actually enjoy. So I think
Oh,
that's like
yeah.
a good learning lesson as well, just as parents. Like you can pull out a little nugget from that of being like, not every child is going to be or act or perform the same way in the same things. And so having almost a principle around the internal things that go on within that child versus the external validation, I just think is so important.
Yeah, I totally agree. I believe a lot of those uh, patterns, if you will, are set in place very early on. Um, One of the things that happened in my life was that I wanted to reconnect with my dad, and he left when I was age 10, but at age 16, I wanted to move to California, and my mom was not ready to leave Ohio, but she supported my desire to move to California because that's where all the top bicycle racers were coming from in the United States. And my dad was now living in California. And so I put my lawnmower and my two bicycles and some clothes in my car that I bought with my own money. And I moved to California at age 16. And I reconnected with my dad. And my brother at that time had no interest in doing that. He didn't really want to have any relationship with my mom either. He was like, get out of my life. Don't touch me. Don't even drop me off at school. And I wanted to understand why my parents did not get along and why had they become divorced. And I had an opportunity to go live with my dad and ask those questions. And so I think I had that, I allowed that curiosity to turn into a strength for me instead of saying I'm from a broken home and my life is going to go off course.
Mhm.
I think the bike riding and being a part of a team and having those, very structured, had to be somewhere every day. That made a huge difference, kept me out of trouble as a teenager, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that, evolved into my dad had several careers. He was a pastor when I was a child, and then he was a counselor. So he had a PhD in counseling psychology. And later on, I actually worked in his practice, and he discovered that people were having memories that were reliable, that they could access before they were born.
Hmm.
And we sat at the dinner table, and he said, "People are not going to believe us that these memories are coming out in my clinical practice." And I said, "So how can we get how can we verify that those memories are real?" And he was using a technique which is now widely used called hypnotic induction. And you relax the patient and they have access to their subconscious and they can see things that are not in their conscious mind. And I was learning to type. And so I got to type up the transcripts of his sessions. And one lady was telling the story of before her birth and then during her birth. And he said, well, if that's true, then something's going on before birth, that we're able to collect these experiences. So I wound up having a really extraordinary connection with my dad later on in my life. First, because I was willing to move to where he lived. Secondly, because I got involved with his professional practice. And I later on became the CFO of an organization that he founded. He was the co-founder of a prenatal and perinatal psychology association. And there were 800 professionals from all over the world who were making similar discoveries to his own, that babies in utero are experiencing way before they have the brain to engage in cognitive behavior. And so there are elements of a new psychology that emerged, which is called now birth psychology. And birth psychology is now mainstream because about 30 years into that activity of trying to figure out, how we could have such a profound influence on life before birth, that the neuroscientists showed up and they said, oh, we've been measuring neural activity in utero for decades. And so suddenly we had hard science and the soft science of psychology. And so I had a really strong connection with my dad later in his life, where he published best-selling books around this whole topic of the influence of the first 1,000 days of our life. So from conception to age 2 of the baby, exactly the time frame that you're in right now, and how important that is for the outcomes that you have. Talking to your baby, communicating with your baby as though they are an adult, because they are an adult being. And they would like to be communicated that way. Baby talk is not appropriate to them. Language is difficult until you learn it. And then you realize, oh, well, we have all this other connection. It doesn't need language, right?
Mhm.
So I think there's some profound elements there that played a role in my life later on. And that was a kind of a surprising discovery, but it was wonderful, where I was able to reconnect with my dad in a way that was transformative for me.
I'm gonna drag you back to your university days. There's an interesting thing happened there. You studied nuclear energy at Princeton, and then you ended up in I don't know the timeline of it, but you ended up at a real estate company managing real estate. You also ended up doing a bunch of entrepreneurial things, starting businesses, selling businesses. How did that kind of take place from going from studying nuclear energy to, all these different, and as far as I know, none of the business ventures you ever did had anything to do with nuclear energy.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't wind up making that a career. I was interested in your senior year at Princeton. You write an extensive research paper, and I wanted to choose something that was the thing I feared the most. And I really didn't understand nuclear energy, and I was afraid of it. And so I was a student in the policy department. They had a school at Princeton called the Woodrow Wilson School, next to the policy or political science department. And so I was able to bring together two advisors, one who was a nuclear physicist and another who was a political science specialist. And they were trying to do a better job helping people understand, how do we site nuclear facilities? Why do we put them in the waterfront or the coastal zone of our countries? So I wrote my paper about the funding of a breeder reactor program on the Tennessee River. And that professor actually was one of the 90 signatories on the Iran nuclear letter that was signed just last year.
Oh, wow.
He's well into his senior years now, but still alive and still a factor. So I had access to these incredible individuals, and I said, I'm only going to be at Princeton another year. I want to tap into something that's truly unique about this place, to explore something that I frankly know nothing about, but I would like to become an expert in that area. And I was able to do that. I think what I discovered about myself is that I was really fascinated at the intersection of humans and technology. And that fascination describes pretty much the rest of my adventures in business, was that I was always involved in some kind of tech and humans, where it impacted humans. I became a lighting expert, again, technology of lighting and manufacturing, where it impacts selling cars or hypermarts or retail sales lighting. And then later on, I got involved with a an entrepreneur who had created an application to um, create the schedule for a veterinarian's office. Make a long story shorter, and people want to be able to schedule appointments without waiting on the phone.
Yeah.
And so we were one of the very first companies to create an application that they could use on their smartphone to schedule an appointment with their veterinarian.
So what year was that?
That was, we started around 2009.
Okay.
And we worked on that venture until 2021. And
That's still
so it
been relatively early in the app.
spanned a large number of years. We had originally started out in the dental market, and I realized that market was too crowded for us, and that it wasn't going to be the kind of productive growth cycle that we needed in order to have a successful exit. And so I went looking for another market. One of the chapters in my book, I talk about failing fast and rethinking what you're doing and innovating and then testing again. And if you bring that into a cycle, you can get away from a bad idea and eventually find the good ideas for your application or for whatever it is that you're wanting to work on. And in our case, we wound up, the entrepreneur that I initially connected with about this was focused on selling a branded service. And I had come off of several years' effort perfecting a method for licensing a technology solution to an existing large subscriber base. And this was really a very different way of looking at it. But once again, I was reframing what it was that I was presented with. And I had this experience of realizing we're never going to compete with AT&T and T-Mobile and the rest of these big players that have all the subscribers. And so I said, how can we take the technology that we have, which was a huge advancement in mobile telephony, just let's say it that way, and how can we still reach the market with that? And so we came up with a way to license the technology so that we bolted onto the back end of AT&T instead of competing with AT&T in the open marketplace, where we would surely lose. And so I took that learning and I applied it to this new situation that I found myself in. And the result was we went to the top 5 companies that had a subscriber base in the veterinary practice management area. And let's just say there were 20,000 veterinarians in the country at the time. And we managed to get a contract with the number 1 provider in that space. As a result, we scaled our business. Instead of going out and competing directly with them, we aligned with them. And we became the back office solution for them. They continued with their brand and to grow their brand. And we scaled our solution to 3,000 hospitals and 100 million pets. So we handled all the communications relating to pet appointments and follow-ups, vaccinations, sick visits, everything. So we built a communications platform for veterinarians. And that was the the way that we reframed it, instead of going out and trying to be the number one brand, we aligned with the number one brand, and by collaborating instead of competing.
That's like the Microsoft problem where, you're definitely going to lose battling Microsoft, but if you can find a way to add some little thing, to one of the services that they offer, you got a half a chance of being a reasonable
That's
business.
right.
But yeah,
That's right.
it's tough. That whole thing is tough. I keep thinking back to, what your mom said with, um, things are going to go wrong basically. And even in this startup, as you're talking about this startup and partnering with an entrepreneur and then figuring out and trying to solve problems, obviously, things go wrong, which means you have to try to solve the problem. So I just keep going back to that and thinking like, how important that way of thought is, or that mindset as you go through things, where inevitably there will be, especially in the entrepreneurial world, there's literally a million problems to solve and shift and pivot. And it's interesting just listening to you talk about these things that you've done in your life. After having heard you said that, it makes a lot of sense, as to why you have been successful in many of these areas, because in sports, things go wrong all the time, and there's very hard mental challenges that occur. I mean, cycling alone is, to me at least, is largely a mental challenge. It is grueling upstairs in the head. It's hard physically, but I think it's way harder mentally. The entrepreneurial ventures that you've done are extremely difficult over a prolonged period of time to just keep running into problems and solving them and pivoting. And so I just thought that's very interesting. That's something you've said so far that's really stuck with me. Um, so
I just one thing to add on that,
Sure.
because I think you could ask, how did I come by that? And I think there are a lot of situations that I could look back on, but one that's really poignant, because it's easy to kind of conceive of this in your mind, is that when you're rowing a boat, um, you have to manage sliding up and down in the boat on a seat. You have to balance the boat. You have to reach out behind you and put the blade in the water, and then pull it past you and get the blade out of the water, and then repeat. And you have to do that in a balance with 7 other rowers.
Mhm.
And you do that at a very high rate of practice, a high rate of speed. And in rowing, there's always a stroke that's incorrect. Someone somewhere in your boat is having a bad stroke. And I worked really persistently with the guys on my team to let go of bad strokes, because the temptation is to internalize a bad stroke and say, I messed up. And now you're reaching out for your next bad stroke
yeah,
instead of letting it go,
just makes
like
things
letting a
worse.
bad relationship go or a bad shot in tennis. You need to let bad strokes go.
Mm.
And I convinced most of the team, and there were 4 varsity boats, not just my team that I was in the actual physical shell with, but the whole team. I was able to reach these guys because I had a lot of life experience that I could share with them, that letting go of bad strokes was good practice. And we started winning more. We trained extraordinarily hard, but so did everybody. What was the real difference? Well, we were doing 2 things conceptually that I think the other teams weren't doing. One was physically, as a practice, we were letting go of bad strokes because they're a fact of life. Just let them go. And now you're reaching out for a good stroke. You're reaching out for the perfect stroke. And that's a paradigm shift over internalizing a bad stroke. You're naturally reaching out for another bad one.
Mhm.
Second thing we did was I tried to encourage the team to conceive of all of the energy in the boat being 100% of the energy flowing through a pipe. Okay. And you can visualize this in a relationship. in business, in literally anything that you do, you can use this concept. And I said, instead of trying so hard, why don't you relax a little bit? Think about giving 90% instead of 100%. And now there's an opportunity in that pipe where all that energy needs to flow out 100% at the other end for you to invite the universal energy source to come in there with you. Now, for me, I'm a Christian. I define that in terms of God. So allowing God to come in and take up the last 10%, instead of you always giving 100%, you give 90 and allow the universal energy come in there and help you rise up to 100%. And this works in all walks of life. And I didn't reach every boy in my rowing team with that message. Some of them just, they weren't ready for that.
Yeah.
It was just a little bit too much of the alignment life, or it was too loosey-goosey for them. But many of them did line up with that idea. And I think we had better outcomes because of it.
Do you think oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Do you think that part of that, like that saying, is just about releasing the force that you might be putting behind something? Because if you're forcing it to happen, then there's more pressure and there's more room for error, mistake, because you're putting all that force and that pressure. Where if you're just like a tad bit more relaxed and allowing, like you said, universal or God or whatever type of energy to come in and kind of just be like, we're going to fill this extra with what is kind of around us. It releases that pressure on the individual, even just mentally, where they're like, okay, I'm good. Like I can give it my all still, but still being in, I guess, flow or alignment with what's going on around me. Is that kind of the principle, I guess, around that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think some athletes are natural at achieving a flow state. Other athletes require coaching. And that's where, some athletes are very coachable. They will listen to an expert. They can integrate those ideas into their practice, and they get a better outcome. So I think that's a really great opportunity to, uh, kind of create a lowest common denominator when you're dealing with a team.
Mhm.
And I think most of what we accomplish in life happens with teams, not individually.
Yeah,
So it's a
even look at
great life skill.
individual sports and every one of them. I mean, so long as they have the resources, they got two coaches and a physio and a athletic therapist and a nutrition person. And the tennis
Mhm.
tournaments are always a great example of that when someone rolls in with like 11 people with them and they'll all tell you there's no chance I'm gonna do well here if I don't have these 11 people with me, and
Yeah.
it's a huge advantage to have these 11 people with me. So the team aspect, yeah, even in individual sports is I mean, even watching the bike racing, I've watched a little bit of the bike racing, like Tour de France and stuff. They would be nowhere without the people helping and assisting with water and all kinds of stuff. And I can only imagine what happens after the race that they need, help with to get their body ready to go through and just a grueler again the next day. So yeah, teams are super important. I want to get to your book here, JC. You wrote a
Okay.
book called Antidote on emotional wealth, and you spelt
Can
it
I
a little
share a screen? Is that
differently. If you like, I'd
okay?
like you just to tell us a little bit about it, and then I'd also like to hear where sort of the inspiration for your book came from.
Sure. Um, I'm just sharing quickly the book cover.
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
If you're able to see that,
Yeah.
If you're listening to us on just the podcast, you could go over to YouTube and see what JC is showing with us on his screen.
okay, yeah, I could show you the front cover, um, and then the back cover is the emotional wealth framework, and this all came about because um, oh, I see. Keep this tab open. I'm there. Okay, here we go. So, uh, this is what's displayed to them, right? Yes.
Yeah, yeah, they
They're
can
able to
see
see.
that now.
Yeah, they're able to see this. Yeah. So that's me down there. Um, and eh, eh, 13 years ago, I was on a bike ride training for a rowing race, actually. And I was on a country road with one other bike rider. And uh, a guy ran a stop sign on the gas and wiped me out at 50 miles an hour. So I spent about a half a second on his car, did a lot of damage to my body, and I flew 100 feet through the air and landed on my face in gravel on the other side of the intersection. And little by little, uh, after the accident, they told me I would if I worked hard, I could learn to walk, but that I would never ride again. And that little 6-year-old boy that had been told he couldn't do sports came back and realized that they didn't know who they were talking to, that I would find a way to walk and I would find a way to ride. And I had no idea what that path would be or how hard it would be, but the pieces of that puzzle fell together eventually. And it was very hard for me to tell the story for the first couple of years. And then uh, I sent these 6 elements of the emotional wealth framework to my mom: health, learning, earning, giving, love, and spirit. And I said, Mom, I think this is why I survived. This is why I'm here. People need to hear this message. And typical my mom, she said, yeah, that's great, but you're missing one. She said, I said, well, what is it, Mom? She said, it's your dreams. Without your dreams, you have nothing.
Mm.
And I realized that that needed to be at the center of all of this. And it is the beginning of everything that we do. Yeah. When we have a dream, it gets us out of bed in the morning. We have aspiration uh, to achieve something, even if it's just survival. And then, and only then, we can be inspired to reach some kind of a goal. And then once we have a goal, we can perspire and achieve that goal. So we have aspiration, inspiration, and perspiration. And the other elements of this health, learning, earning, giving, love, and spirit unfolded from some earlier activities that I had with Boy Scouting, where scouts would come to me and say, how can I be more like you, Mr. Chamberlain? And I said, well, you need to find your own passion in life, and you need to have a good emotional bank account. And they would look at me like I was from another planet. And they would say, well, what's an emotional bank account? And I'd say, well, do you have a passbook savings account? You mow a yard, you shovel a walkway, you get $10, you put it in a bank. Well, that's a passbook savings account. I said, imagine having the same kind of an account with your parents, and you build up trust with your parents. And when you want to go to a concert or you want a special privilege, you go to that emotional bank account. And if you don't have a balance with your parents, then you can't make a withdrawal. But if you do the dishes without being asked, or keep your room clean, or do your homework on time, those are ways to build up your own personal emotional bank account with your parents. And so that concept flowed through to this emotional wealth concept that came out of being hit by the car and finding a way to recover, and then understanding why all of these different communities of my life, that I had a huge, deep well to reach into in terms of my health. I had a lifelong learning that allowed me to then understand situations better by continuing to learn. I had earned my way to a certain kind of security. I then discovered that giving also makes our heart grow, and that love relationships are the essence of family, where sometimes we feel like our family is the bane of our existence.
It seems
And
pretty obvious, JC, but like if you were to tell somebody, hey, you can have 100% in one of these categories, and then the other categories are going to be at, 10, 15%, or you can have like 50 to 60% in every category, which one would you take? It seems really obvious, but just sitting here looking at this, in my own life at least, I found that when I get to a certain point in another category, like you were just saying, if I have a certain degree of health, maybe it opens up an opportunity in a different area to now go and pursue it where you feel like you have enough in that one basket. Like example you just gave was you got to a point financially with security, and then you realized, hey, you know what? Giving some of this to other people is actually a really enjoyable thing. Um, so it seems very obvious, but like in the day to day of life, it seems like you can get so caught up in just one of these aspects of life as if trying to get 100% in that one category is going to solve all your problems when, in reality, it's probably like getting to 50% or something like that. And all of them would give you such a much better life.
yeah, I think, and that's really a good insight on all of this. People would ask me frequently, how can I kind of self-assess as it relates to this framework? And so we came up with a life satisfaction survey that, of course, is in the shape of a bicycle wheel. And we're about to launch it from my website, which is the antidotethebook.com. You can see it here at the bottom of the screen. And uh, there is a workbook that's included with each chapter that allows people to in, internalize the concepts from the story that's presented in each chapter. Um, and what we've learned is that since most of what we do in life happens in teams, that we find what our strengths are by looking at the life satisfaction survey, finding out where we rate ourselves low or high in a particular area, and then looking for teammates who complement our weaknesses or complement our strengths. And we can engage in the same kind of discussion when we're contemplating marriage, of finding out what are the strengths of my proposed life partner. How might we get along? How do we think about money together?
Mhm.
What will our relationship be like? The spirit connection for me is very important. Um, I grew up in a house where we prayed quietly, but we never prayed aloud. And I'm my wife today, we pray aloud. And it's been one of the joys of my life that we could do that. So I'm very grateful that we had that conversation before we were married about open prayer, if you will, or simply, praying not just at meal times.
So you
Um,
share the experience together by doing that.
that's right. That's right. And so we're better together. And I think that this allows us to see where those synergies are. Um, and as a practical matter, when I was confronting this gigantic setback of being paralyzed and being told, I would never ride a bicycle again, all these different communities showed up in my life. In addition to my health, that was people from my school, people from work, people from my church, my family. These were all resources for me, and I realized that we all have these resources. I just suddenly needed these resources to come from a variety of different parts of my life. And so the more I looked at that, the framework emerged to me that we all have this framework at work in our life, and we can work to increase the balance we have in any one of these areas. We can do it consciously because we've probably done it mostly unwittingly, just by belonging to organizations or going to work for a company or being in a marriage relationship. Uh, these are ways that we learn we have a balance, an emotional balance, in addition to a physical balance.
Mm.
Yeah.
It
I
is
feel
kind of, oh, go ahead, Asia.
I was just going to say too, it also just makes you almost look at these 7 pillars, the 6 pillars of the dream kind of being at the center, and go be almost preparing for impact. Because for you, had you not consciously or subconsciously been pouring into those pillars of your framework, you wouldn't have had anything to draw from when you really needed it. And so I think too, it's like it reminds you that every day something new could happen. And like if you're not constantly pouring into yourself or these pillars or your marriage or, you know, your experiences or whatever it might be, then when something does happen to you, you have nowhere to draw from. You might not have that community, you might not have those people, you might not have the finances, you might not have whatever it is that you're needing in those times. And just the importance of like, okay, how do I maximize these pillars right now where I'm healthy and I'm able to and I want to and I'm excited about life and where I'm going. And I think too that's just a reminder. Obviously you had to go through a tragic accident in order to be like, wow, I'm so grateful probably for the work you did and the people you met and the community you'd built and the, the financial stability you'd had at that point in your life already as well. But so many people I think have these things happen to them and they aren't in those positions. And then they feel the impacts of that too. So, this book probably kind of gets you in that headspace of going, okay, how do I pour into these pillars of my life just for, you know, longevity or fulfillment within my life, but also for if there's a time in my life where I need to lean on them.
Right. The definition of an accident is we didn't see it coming, right? And yet we have an antidote, and it's not something that a physician can prescribe to you. It's
Right.
not something that a nurse can inject into you. It's something that is inborn to your psyche, that's different from physical assets. It's your emotional assets. And these are substantial. And we all
Mhm.
have a positive balance, even if it's a 1 out of 7. We have something. We have something in each one of these areas. And this allows us to then be more conscious about how we look at those parts of our life. If I were to boil it down to one word, I would say belong, right? Belonging allows us to derive a positive balance in a lot of different areas of our life.
One of the big concepts that I believe in, JC, and I think it fits well with this, is I believe that the more long term somebody can think, so the more discipline you have to act in your best interests over a longer time frame, the greater quality of life you're going to have. And it fits so well with what you're saying here. Like, if you're very short term minded on your health and, you're really out of shape and you eat terrible things because it's easy and it's cheaper and whatever you want to say. And then all of a sudden something comes up where you have a problem with your health and you're already unhealthy to begin with. That's a real problem. If you make money every 2 weeks from your job and you spend all of it every 2 weeks from your job, and there becomes a financial crunch where you need $1,500 to fix your car, and you have nothing to draw on because your time frame is so short that you spend all your money in the 2 weeks. And it applies to each one of these. Learning is another example. If you're not willing to put in some time to learn to be really good at something, you shouldn't expect to have a well-paying job or be an expert in any field. Like, it applies to all of these. So I like to, I really think about this for myself. I'm pretty hardcore about this, to be honest. with just thinking long term. What could I sacrifice today that's gonna, be 3 times as valuable 5 years from now for me? And it happens in a number of ways. But
Yeah, there we are.
I keep thinking about that, just listening to you talk about your framework and just the discipline and sort of time frame you need to think of in order to have deposits in each one of those categories that you can draw upon.
Yeah, life is complex, right? And so there's
There.
no simple answer to that. Um, but I think we're all leading a life that is more faceted than we might admit.
Sure.
And that's how we get these positive balance in these different areas of our life. And there might be other broader definitions, but my experience of my recovery helped me to see these as areas of my life that I could rely on. And that's some of the experiences that I share in the book about how these different parts of my life showed up. Um, and so I couldn't ignore it. Um, but I think it does help to have the long view, and to realize that this is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Right.
And that's the best perspective to have about your life, is that it's okay to be behind, just like it's okay to let go of a bad stroke. It's all right for things to not be okay,
Yeah. There we go.
because we have these assets, and we can be reassured, because we all have a balance in each one of these accounts, whether we like the number or not.
Yeah.
It's there, and we can work on it. And the result is nothing but good.
Right. So where can people get your book, JC, and where can people find out a little bit more about you?
Sure. Thank you. And go to antidotethebook.com, where you'll find a connection to Amazon. You can buy the book on Amazon. There's also a button where you can click to buy it at a discount. I have a publisher called Ingram Spark, which is the image I was just showing you is on my Ingram Spark page. They're a fantastic publisher. And I also have recorded the Kindle. So it's a Kindle book, and I recorded an audiobook. People who like to listen to the book instead, what's included on Kindle and audiobook is a downloadable workbook. So the questions that we ask in each chapter are downloadable for those you subscribe for free once you're on that page, and you can get the workbook for free.
Amazing.
Cool. And then,
I'm the only one who doesn't recognize the reader on the audiobook, by the way.
yeah.
Because we say we don't recognize our own voice.
Yeah. And
That was
then
quite an experience, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
I bet.
you have a website as well. Maybe you just mentioned your website and
Antidotethebook.com. And then on there, actually, you can link to my Strava, which is where I have my sports activities. There is an events link, which is another page on my website where you can see the races that I'm training for and events that I'm going to. And then I have a speaker page also on there.
perfect.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, JC. I really
you.
enjoyed speaking with you, and hopefully you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Absolutely. It was terrific, and very best of luck to you as a family as
Thank
you
you
grow.
so much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
It'll be, maybe 6 or 7 months, and our life will look a little bit different now. So,
I'm going to
we're
send
trying
you a
to
link. I'll send you a link after we sign off to some more resources.
Would love
Perfect.
that. Perfect.
All right. Okay. Thank you very
so
much,
much.
JC. We'll have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.